The late afternoon sun hung low over Memphis, Tennessee, a fiery red ball dipping toward the horizon, about 2 miles off in the distance. Sasha Coleman trudged down the cracked asphalt of Beale Street's quieter end, her old combat boots scuffing against the pavement. At 38, she was a Marine Corps lieutenant, back from places most folks only saw on the news. Helmand, Mosul, name a hellhole, she'd been there. Her gray hoodie clung to her frame, damp with sweat, and her ripped jeans showed wear from years of hard living. The backpack slung over her shoulder weighed her down, but she carried it like it was nothing, shoulders squared, head high, steps steady. You didn't shake that kind of posture after 15 years in the service, not even in civilian clothes. She hadn't been back here in a decade, not since her mom's car got T-boned by a drunk driver on I-40. Memphis felt like a time capsule, the same kids hollering trash talk on the basketball court 100 yards down, the same smoky tang of Ruby's BBQ ribs drifting through the air. It wrapped around her like a warm blanket, but one that didn't quite fit anymore. She caught her reflection in a busted storefront window. Same sharp brown eyes, same tight braids. But something was off. This was home, sure, but it didn't feel like hers. Not after burying her mom. Not after the sand and blood of war zones became her normal. A couple of teens shot hoops under a rusted rim, their laughter bouncing off the brick walls. "Yo, she looked like she don't play," one yelled, clocking her vibe. Sasha smirked faintly. Kid had no idea. She adjusted her pack and kept walking, the ghosts of Memphis trailing her every step. Sasha Coleman kept her pace steady down the worn-out stretch of Beale Street's edge, the late Memphis sun casting her shadow, long and lean across the pavement. The echoes of those kids' laughter from the basketball court still lingered in her ears, a bittersweet reminder of the life she'd left behind a decade ago. Her mom's voice used to call her home from that same court, sharp and warm, before that drunk driver on I-40 stole it all away. Now at 38, after years of dodging bullets in Helmand and Mosul, Sasha felt the weight of her backpack more like a tether than a burden, like it was anchoring her to this ghost town of memories. She wasn't some lost tourist in her ripped jeans and faded hoodie. This was her turf, even if it didn't recognize her anymore. The smell of Ruby's BBQ ribs wafted over from a block away, curling into her nose, tugging at her like an old friend. She exhaled slow, letting it settle, when a low rumble cut through the haze. A black patrol car creeping alongside her, tires crunching gravel about 10 feet off her left shoulder. The window slid down with a lazy whine, and there he was. Officer Ryan Kessler, all thick neck and buzz-cut arrogance, his mirrored shades glinting like a cheap movie villain. "Hey, sweetheart, you lost or something?" His voice scraped like a rusty blade, dripping with that smug drawl she'd heard too many times from men who thought they owned the world. Sasha stopped cold, boots planted firm, and turned her head just enough to lock eyes, or what she figured were eyes, behind those shades. Her pulse ticked up, not from fear, but from that old Marine instinct kicking in. She didn't say a word, just stared, letting him feel the weight of her silence. Kessler smirked wider, leaning out the window, his meaty arm dangling like he was posing for a photo. "What's a gal like you doing wandering around here? We've had some break-ins, you know. Mine's showing me some ID." Sasha's jaw tightened, her fingers flexing against the strap of her pack. She'd faced down insurgents with AKs, sandstorms that swallowed whole convoys, and here was this clown acting like she was some stray he could herd. "Last I checked, walking ain't a crime in Tennessee," she shot back, her voice low, steady, cutting through his bullshit like a knife through butter. Kessler's smirk faltered, just for a split second, before he swung the door open and stepped out, all 6'2" of him towering over her like he thought size alone could make her flinch. "I don't like your tone, lady," he growled, closing the gap, his boots thudding heavy on the asphalt. "Let's try that again. ID now." Sasha didn't budge, her brown eyes burning into him. She'd come home to breathe, not to bow, and this guy was about to learn that the hard way. The Memphis sun dipped lower, painting the cracked asphalt of Beale Street's edge in shades of blood orange, but Sasha Coleman barely noticed. Her boots were rooted to the pavement, the same pavement she'd run across as a kid chasing pickup games on that rusted basketball court 100 yards down. back when her mom's voice still echoed through the humid air. Now, a decade after that drunk driver on I-40 silenced it forever, she stood facing Officer Ryan Kessler, his hulking frame looming just 2 feet away, his mirrored shades flashing like a taunt. The tangy scent of Ruby's BBQ ribs still hung faint in the air, a cruel tease of home against the sour taste rising in her throat. She'd come back to breathe, to reclaim some piece of herself after 15 years of war zones, Hellman's dust, Mosul's rubble. But this guy, with his buzz-cut swagger and gravelly drawl, was choking that hope right out of her. "ID now," he'd barked, stepping out of his patrol car like he owned the damn street, her jaw clenched tighter, fingers digging into the strap of her pack. She'd faced worse than him, Taliban snipers, IEDs, but something about his smug, sweetheart jab burned hotter than any desert sun. Sasha reached into her hoodie pocket, slow and deliberate, pulling out her Marine Corps ID. She held it up, not handing it over, letting him squint at the name. Lieutenant Sasha Coleman. Kessler snatched it like a playground bully, his thick fingers smudging the edges. "Marine Corps, huh?" "Bullshit," he scoffed, voice loud enough to carry, then flung it down to the asphalt with a flick of his wrist. It landed face up in the dirt, her rank glaring back at her like a slap. Her breath hitched, rage surging through her veins like wildfire. She'd bled for that card, 18-hour patrols, shrapnel scars crisscrossing her left arm, and this jackass just tossed it like trash. "Pick it up," she said, voice low, each word a loaded gun. Kessler laughed, a harsh, guttural sound, and stepped closer, his shadow swallowing hers. "You don't tell me shit, lady. Turn around, hands behind your back." Her pulse roared in her ears, but her training kept her steady. Around them, the street stirred, folks trickling out from stoops and storefronts, maybe 20 now, phones up, eyes wide. A teen girl in braids, no older than 17, muttered, "This dude's tripping," her camera rolling. Kessler's meaty hand darted for Sasha's wrist, aiming to twist it, to break her. She didn't flinch, just stared into those shades, her silence daring him to try. 15 years of war had forged her into something he couldn't bend, and he was about to find out how bad he'd misread the play. The Memphis dusk thickened, the sun a dying ember bleeding red across Beale Street's jagged edges. But Sasha Coleman stood unyielding, her boots gripping the asphalt where she'd once raced as a kid, chasing echoes of her mom's voice from that basketball court 100 yards off. Now that voice was a ghost, snuffed out a decade ago on I-40, and all Sasha wanted was to walk these streets, her streets, without a fight. Officer Ryan Kessler had other plans. His meaty paw clamped down on her wrist, twisting hard, his mirrored shades glinting like a predator's eyes under the streetlights flickering on. He'd tossed her Marine Corps ID into the dirt minutes ago, her name, Lieutenant Sasha Coleman, smudged and mocked, a spit in the face of every scar she'd earned in Helmand and Mosul. "Turn around now," he snarled, his buzz-cut head tilting with a sneer, like he could break her with a flick of his thick neck. Her blood boiled, a furnace roaring in her chest. She'd faced death in sand-swept foxholes, and this punk thought he could own her. Sasha moved like lightning, years of combat muscle memory snapping into gear. She twisted her arm free in one fluid motion, a dancer's grace with a soldier's steel, sending Kessler stumbling forward, his boots scuffing the pavement like a drunk at last call. She didn't strike, just stepped back, hands loose, eyes blazing into him. "Touch me again, and you'll wish you hadn't," she said, voice a razor wrapped in calm. Kessler's face flushed crimson, his growl ripping through the air. "That's assault! You're done, bitch!" But the street wasn't his anymore. A crowd swelled, 40 strong now, spilling from stoops and Ruby's BBQ joint a block down, phones up like torches. A teen girl in braids, camera rolling, shouted, "She didn't even hit you, man. We all see this shit." An old-timer in a faded Grizzlies cap leaned on a cane, bellowing, "This why we don't trust y'all no more." Sasha's chest heaved, not from fear, but from a rage that wasn't just hers. It was theirs. She'd fought for this country, taken shrapnel to the arm, only to come home and get treated like a stray dog. "This is my street," she roared, her voice cracking the humid air. "I bled for this place, And you don't get to make me nothing. The crowd erupted. Whistles, claps, a woman yelling, "Tell him, sis!" Kessler froze, his hand hovering over his cuffs, sweat beading on his brow. He'd misjudged her, misjudged them all. Phones gleamed like a jury, and Sasha stood tall, a Marine in ripped jeans, daring him to push further. He wouldn't win this. Not tonight. The Memphis night crept in, heavy and thick, the last slivers of sunset fading into a bruised purple over Beale Street's weathered edges. Sasha Coleman stood like a statue carved from grit, her boots still planted where she'd dodged Officer Ryan Kessler's clumsy grab moments ago. The asphalt beneath her was the same she'd torn up as a kid, racing to that basketball court 100 yards away, her mom's voice a lighthouse in the humid haze. Gone now, stolen by that A40 wreck a decade back. She'd come home to reclaim something, anything, after 15 years of war zones, her Marine Corps ID now lying scuffed in the dirt where Kessler had flung it, a spit on every firefight she'd survived. His buzz-cut bulk loomed, red-faced and panting. His shades knocked askew when she'd slipped his grip like smoke, leaving him flailing before a crowd of 40, phones blazing, voices rising. "This is my street," she'd roared, her words a Molotov cocktail igniting the air, and they'd cheered, a chorus of, "Tell him, sis," still ringing in her ears. Headlights sliced through the dusk, a second patrol car rolled up, tires crunching gravel. Out stepped Sergeant James Jimmy Torres, 50, wiry and weathered, his brown eyes sharp under a salt and pepper buzz. He clocked Kessler's sweat-soaked fury and Sasha's unshaken stance, then sighed like a man who'd seen this movie before. "What the hell did you do now, Ryan?" His voice was gravelly, tired, but carried a bite. Kessler jabbed a finger at Sasha, spittle flying. "She resisted, assaulted me." The teen girl with braids snorted, waving her phone. "Man, we got it all. Check the tape." Torres' gaze flicked to the crowd, then down to Sasha's ID glinting in the dirt. He crouched, picked it up with a reverence Kessler couldn't fake, reading aloud, "Lieutenant Sasha Coleman, Marine Corps." The air shifted, murmurs rippled, Kessler's jaw locked tight. Torres straightened, handing it back to Sasha with a nod. "You just tried to cuff a Marine for walking home, you dumbass?" The crowd hooted. Someone yelled, "Get him, Jimmy!" Kessler's fist balled, but Torres cut in, low and lethal. "Get in your car, Ryan!" "Go, before I write you up myself." Kessler froze, then stormed off, his patrol car peeling out, tires squealing like a wounded beast. Torres turned to Sasha, softening. "You pressing charges, Lieutenant?" Her throat tightened, rage still simmered, but she shook her head. "I didn't come back for war, just wanted to breathe my own air." Torres nodded, respect in his eyes. "Fair enough." She'd won, but the taste was bitter. Home wasn't peace, not yet. Sasha Coleman sank onto the sagging steps of her mom's old house, 200 yards from Beale Street's chaos, the night air thick with the scent of fresh-cut grass and the sizzle of frying catfish from next door. Her combat boots thudded soft against the wood, the same steps she'd climbed as a kid, dreaming of hoops on that court down the block, before the I-40 crash took her mom, before Helmand and Mosul carved her into a Marine. Tonight she'd face down Officer Ryan Kessler, his smug shades and meaty hands no match for her steel. He'd tossed her ID like garbage, tried to cuff her on her own turf, but she'd flipped the script, slipped his grip, stood tall while the crowd of 40 roared, phones blazing like lanterns. Torres had rolled in, sent Kessler packing, his tires screeching defeat into the dusk. She'd won, but the victory sat heavy, a rock in her gut. The screen door creaked, and Aunt Lena eased down beside her, gray braids glinting under the porch light. "You still got that fire, baby," she said, her voice warm as a quilt, handing Sasha a cold Coke. Sasha popped the tab, the hiss cutting the quiet. "Does it ever stop, Aunt Lena?" she asked, voice raw, eyes tracing the scars on her knuckles. Kessler was just one fight. War had been worse, but this stung different, sharper on home soil. Lena chuckled, soft and wise. "Maybe not, but every time you stand up, some kid out there sees it, learns they can too." Down the street, a boy's voice whooped, That lady was badass. Sasha's lips twitched, a faint smile breaking through. It wasn't peace, not yet, but maybe it was a spark, enough to light someone else's way. Sasha Coleman's stand on Beale Street teaches us that strength isn't just about fighting, it's about knowing who you are and refusing to shrink. She faced Kessler's badge and bigotry with a Marine's grit, proving you don't need to swing to win. Sometimes standing tall is enough. The crowd's phones lit up the night, a reminder that community can tip the scales when you're cornered. Life's like that. Bullies bank on your silence, but one voice backed by others can break their grip. Aunt Lena's words ring true. Every fight you take plants a seed for someone watching, so pick your battles but don't dodge the ones that matter. In today's world, where power flexes on screens and streets, hold your ground, lean on your people, and let your scars fuel your fire. Change starts small, but it starts with you. Thank you for watching the video. Please comment with number 1 to let me know you have watched the whole video. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell to always receive new videos as soon as possible.